Now that I've finished Sifu, I can't wait to give you guys my impressions about it. And granted, from my level of excitement, you could tell that I enjoyed it, but I wanted to give a breakdown about what it is that I thought about the game overall. For those of you that are new to the channel, let me just tell you how I break down my reviews. I look at three portions of the game: its narrative elements, its presentation, and of course, its gameplay. I don't try to be objective in any way. Instead, I just want to give you my impressions of the game. There will always be something that you might disagree with, but this is just about sharing opinions. Let's go. So to start off, this seems like the most stereotypical take on a kung fu tale where you're led on the path to avenge your father's death. I'll just be upfront with you, there's very little special about how the game's narrative plays out. You'll have a few moments of exposition as you go along with some characters, popping up options for you to go down the narrative tree, but that's about it. Bosses, of course, add some of that exposition as well, but again, don't take anything other than a tale of revenge. As you progress, you'll unlock some items that will give you added flavor to the world around you, presenting it in one of those cool boards you see in the movies where you post things on the wall and then they have like all these type of strings attached, interconnected, you know, in order to make it seem like you're solving a big mystery. But when in reality in this game, you just keep moving on and on to the next challenge. Even by the time the credits roll, I was left very underwhelmed from the narrative perspective because that part of the game left me feeling like they could have done so much more with it, but I get it. The developers are slow clap, they are an indie studio, and maybe if they had to focus on creating a fuller experience, this is an area where they could have really dove in a little bit further. So, from a narrative perspective, I'll say the game is passable, but nothing too much to be really excited about. This game style really impressed me. Being a fan of kung fu movies of old and enjoying the closer to modern classics like The Raid Redemption, this game really satisfies with its locations and set pieces that it has chosen. Early in the game, you're treated with a scene inspired by the famous hallway scene from the movie Oldboy, and there were many of these special moments later throughout the game where I felt I was constantly being rewarded for my continued progression. I don't want to give anything more than that because if you are a fan of this genre of movie, experiencing them yourself unspoiled will absolutely be one of the highlights of your playthrough. As far as the stages themselves, of which there are 5 in total with some variation built within them, I never felt like a certain location overstayed its welcome, and especially in level 3, my favorite stage, I felt like I didn't get enough of those moments. And if we were ever to get some kind of sequel or spiritual successor to this title, that is one area where I wish they'd focus on a little bit more. I played the game on my PC and technically the game ran well, though I will say I had about 3 crashes through my total playthrough, which is a rarity on my system, my 3080 NVIDIA graphic card system. I rarely felt a slowdown happen, and when it did, it was when I was doing all types of things and the stage was filled with thugs. As far as the art style of the game, it really does a great job at conveying the tone of the game overall. It's a pseudo-realistic style that allows for expressive looks from its characters, and the clean lines and heightened colors lets the game really pop at times. And lastly, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that awesome soundtrack. The game had some incredible music that really did a lot to bring you into the game when the developers knew at the right time to play the right song when it's needed. This soundtrack is absolutely one of my favorite parts of this game. Presentation in this game is wonderful, with my only gripes being that I wish we had more levels and location variations. Man, I cannot remember a game where I felt so connected with my character from an input perspective. The team at Slow Clap made sure that whatever you pressed was prioritized. If you wanted to punch, you were gonna punch. If you were gonna parry, you're gonna parry. If you wanted to dodge, you were gonna dodge. The game just did so much in rewarding you with playing it, because the more you did, the more you became a kung fu master. Well, in the digital sense at least. I see that a lot of people say this game is a roguelike, but it's really not. One of the staples of a roguelike genre is the random nature of the game and the forcing of starting all the way over from the beginning when you die. The game instead works in the way that when you die, you restart at the stage that you're on, not all the way back to the beginning. Also, the game doesn't procedurally generate any of the levels for you as you go along, and then you can start seeing how this doesn't fit the roguelike category at all. The game is all about reaching a certain level and then having to keep attacking it until you finally conquer it. The kicker is that the game works off a system that I haven't seen before in the game, and that's where the true challenge of the game lies. You see, every time you die, you grow older. As you grow older, you get more powerful, just as the stereotypes of kung fu movies where the old kung fu master is at the top level of power that you can achieve, and it's the same in the game. Now, the downside to getting older is that as you get more powerful, your life bar decreases, so it's a highly give and take situation. Now, the clever part of the game is when you die, you have a death counter, and every time you die, whatever number is on that death counter, you get added to your total age. Now, this is manageable because as you move forward, especially on your first few playthroughs, you will die, but there are enemies you meet along the way that when defeated will lower your total death count. The challenge lies when you meet that enemy that you can't beat. Then you start to see your age get progressively older and older until you reach your 70s, and then when you die there, it's game over, and then you start over in that particular level. It's this clever mechanic that really makes this game work. I think if the game had a typical system where you just had a set life bar and a set number of continues, it wouldn't make the stakes feel as impactful, because as you get to see how old you are, it's letting you know that many mistakes are being made. And it's this system of death that makes the game so interesting. You could get to a level at 25 years old, but by the time you defeat that level's boss, you're now 69. 69. With how the game works, whatever age you reach the next stage in is the age you start, and nobody wants to start a whole new stage at such an older age because you know that that will affect the amount of attempts you have in order to beat the next stage, and then on and on. It's in this understanding that Sifu finds its brilliance, because once you've beaten an area, it encourages you to go back and complete it at a better age so you can make your journey moving forward much easier. And again, since the game doesn't procedurally generate the stage in any way, you can create your optimal route, memorizing the stage to ensure your run comes out clean. I will add that this may also be a part where I could see many players not enjoying. I do find that I can enjoy repetitive tasks in certain games, and this is one that worked for me. It may not work for you, and I can totally understand that. Now, I will say the reward for these repetitive tasks is in the way that you can use the points that you've accumulated in your run. You can use those points to unlock different skills that do indeed stay permanent, but they do require a good investment unlocking them, because you have to unlock them 5 times in total for that permanence. I would say that arguably only a few of those skills are imperative to the way that you proceed through the levels. Some are just fun to play along with. I personally found 4 of those skills imperative to my playstyle, but your mileage will vary. There are certain skill checks along the way that will ensure that you understand certain mechanics before you move along that will frustrate you, but overall, the bane of your existence are the bosses themselves. Each requires a different mechanic to beat them, but after you spend the time and effort and energy to beat them, you will be left with such a satisfaction and joy, and you'll be wondering why you even spend so much time to beat them before you finally got them. And also, to help your playthroughs, as you go along, you will unlock shortcuts that don't require you to do the whole stage all over again to get to that boss. So once you get those shortcuts, they will drop a significant amount of time of that grinding that you did in order to get there. But in order to get these shortcuts, you typically have to get all the way to the end of the level, and then you'll open up the shortcut to begin with. I must say that the weakest part of the gameplay for me is the camera. Before you learn the levels and know where to place yourself, you will find yourself constantly stuck in some corner where the camera makes weird movements and you can't properly see your enemies. It gives the attacks landed by your enemies in these positions a very cheap feeling because you feel like the game's working against you, and for a game that relies on its speed and its movements, that's the last thing you want to experience. The only real counter in this is to scope your vicinity as soon as you go in, find the middle area and do your best to stay around that. But especially in boss battles, where some of that flexibility to station yourself where you want to be exactly isn't as easy, it'll become rage-inducing where you just want to throw that controller to the wall. My final big criticism of the game is also in the lack of flexibility when dealing with some of the bosses. This is completely a me thing, but I personally would have enjoyed it more if I could deal with certain bosses in the way that I'd like. I say this because there's a certain playstyle that I prefer, and then trying to implement that into certain bosses was a complete recipe for disaster, even to the point where I had to rework my whole playstyle just to beat bosses like the last one in particular, where I was absolutely punished for learning to play a whole way and now having to adapt and change my thought processes so late in the game. Again, I understand it's a me issue, but I do love it when games have that built-in flexibility to have almost any playstyle when against any boss. You just have to adjust your timing windows. Well, suffice to say, when it comes to gameplay, Sifu really is a fantastic game and one that I've put on my Game of the Year watch list early in 2022 because of how polished and experienced it was. Sifu is a stellar game and one that proves that indie developers are the saving grace of the industry. You can tell Slow Clap had one purpose in mind and then they built a game around it to fully benefit from what it was that they were trying to achieve. I personally just put under 20 hours in the game, but this is going to be a fun game to watch as people get their times in check. I've already heard that there are people out there that have beaten the game in 45 minutes. While the narrative was serviceable, it was easily the game's weakest point, but everything beyond that is a delight, especially the gameplay loop itself. But keep in mind, there are some things you can complete after the credit rolls, and I highly encourage you to do it to get the most out of the narrative, which is already lacking so much, because in the end of the day, you want to become the truest form of Sifu possible. If you find yourself as someone who enjoys fast-paced combat, learning enemy patterns, seeing your skill increase as you play, Sifu is for you. Look, what you've heard about Sifu is true. It is a tough and punishing experience, but you can persevere through it in order to make it to the end. But if that type of gameplay isn't for you, I will tell you, thankfully, the developers at Slow Clap have already announced that they're going to be introducing an easier mode for the game. Now, I do highly recommend that you try to play the game in its purest form, the way it was meant to be. But if you're just not that type of gamer and you just want to feel with that kung fu energy, then wait for the update and enjoy it to your purpose. Thank you for watching my review of Sifu. If you enjoyed this review and want to see more like it, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and come to say what's up to me on stream at twitch.tv/thegladiator or find me on Twitter at thegladiator. Until the next video, stay gaming.